the serpent was right. He challenged Eve and said, no, I don't think God's going to make you die for this. Yes, Adam and Eve died. I'm not denying that. But the punishment of death was a mercy more than it was a punishment, because it was only through that death that they could reach the life that they were made for. The very first line of this passage, God formed man out of the clay and blew into his nostrils life. Life was the beginning of man. Life is the purpose for which man was made. So the serpent was right. No, you're not going to die, at least not for good. And it's that at least not for good that he didn't say. Because the devil is the father of lies, and every good lie begins with the truth and just hides or doesn't say a little bit of the truth. This is the story of the fall. We're all familiar with it. And in this story of the fall, in these lies of the devil, we can see every single sin of our lives. The devil comes in when temptation comes and tries to convince us, that thing you want to do isn't really that bad. Surely it's not going to be the final straw that kills you. Besides, it looks good. Eve eventually saw the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eyes, desirable for wisdom. This is all true. Every action we do, Thomas tells us, we do for some good. Even sin, there's a perceived good that we pursue. So we listen to these lies of the devil, and ultimately we might fall into sin. And then the devil changes his tune a little and said, oh, that was bad. You know what you should do? You should hide. There's no way God could possibly forgive your sin. And sometimes there's some truth in that too. What we do could be so bad that it cuts us off from the very life of grace that God fills us with at the beginning. And sometimes we let that lie win out as well. But if we do, we end up living in almost a perpetual Lent, where the small sacrifices, the small things we try to hold back from, become burdensome beyond belief, where giving up chocolate becomes this great onus on us, this great burden, even though before we decided to give it up, we only had one Snickers bar a week. Suddenly, if we've given in to this lie of what I've done is terrible, we're living cut off from God, and the smallest difficulty becomes huge. As Christians living beyond the resurrection, we know how the story ends. We know God raises up for us a Savior. We know Christ dies. We know He rises again. And we know that we are restored to that life which we are called to from the beginning. We also know how the story in Genesis continues. God comes to the garden, calls out and says, "Where are you?" When Adam and Eve finally come out from hiding, God says, "All right, you ate from the fruit. You can't stay in the garden. You got to get out." And there's again this punishment that is actually mercy. But God also takes away the coverings that Adam and Eve made for themselves. When they sinned, they covered themselves out of shame. God strips them bare from that. There's nothing that Adam and Eve had or did that God didn't already know. So He kind of makes them realize that, and then He covers them with skins made of leather, because His mercy is always greater. He strips Adam and Eve from their shame and covers them with new and better life. What are we hiding from God? What fig leaves have we sewed together and allowed the devil to tell us, "No, you need to hide that"? This Lent, what do we need to allow God to strip away from us so that He can cover us with new garments? What do we need to allow God to strip away from us so He can clothe us with a robe of salvation?
Virgo